mean, it's incredibly horrific to see the flats and to see the level of damage, but it's also heroic to see the frontline emergency workers that were first responders here on the scene in the middle of a bank holiday, early hours of the morning, making sure that they got everybody out safely and then looking at how they could get the fire under control. I'm incredibly grateful for the firefighters, the emergency services and the local authority that did everything they could to ensure that people were out of the building.
Residents have told us that there were no fire alarms that they could hear. It was only through their neighbours' efforts that they got out. And when they came to get out of the area here, one of the gates to their escape route was padlocked. What do you make of that? Do you believe that account, and what will you do about it?
I mean, that's horrific to hear that, and I know that the London Fire Brigade have already started an investigation, and I don't want to preempt that investigation, but we've got to make sure that people have fire escape routes. It's an obligation, it's a legal obligation. I'll be meeting the Health and Safety Executive and the Building Safety Regulators tomorrow to ensure that everybody's aware of their obligations, their legal requirements, and to ensure that people do have that safety route, and to make sure that those alarms and those systems that have been put in place are there to make sure that people are safely out of buildings and that they're aware of the fire if one happens and what happens in those circumstances.
The other reality of this is that it is people's lives. We've just met a Polish couple who are supposed to be getting married in Poland in 3 weeks' time. All their documents, their wedding dress that arrived a few days ago is in that flat, and they're uninsured. What can you do?
Well, first of all, we'll be working with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to look at how we can retrieve documents for people, because we know that's incredibly important. If we can't get them out of the building, is to work with our other departments to support them, working with the local authority to make sure that there is housing and accommodation for people, and they've worked at speed, and incredibly grateful for the work that they've done. But part of this recovery now is to support people in carrying on with their lives after what must have been absolutely horrific. One moment you get out safe, and then you realise you've lost everything, and I can't imagine how that feels for those that are in those circumstances, and we'll do everything we can to support them.
What the residents have told us amounts to breaches of fire safety law. How will you ensure that people are held responsible?
Well, again, I can't preempt the investigation. London Fire Brigade will be carrying out that investigation to see what happened here on the site. I'm very pleased that people responded very quickly. Within 5 minutes, we're on the scene and we're able to get people out of the building. And I know people will be incredibly worried, especially given that this is a building that was having remediation work done for cladding. And I think it's been going far too slowly, the remediation work. We talked about Grenfell. Phase 2 is on the 4th of September, and we still have significant amounts of cladding on buildings, and I will be making sure that I push the Health and Safety Executive and the Building Safety Regulators and those responsible who own the buildings to make sure that remediation work is carried out as quickly as possible. It's too slow. These are not assets, these are people's homes, and people need to feel safe in their own homes.
We've heard from the Prime Minister just this morning how tight money is to get this stuff done, and removing cladding is complex, it takes time, and it takes a lot of money. How can you prioritise it further to put people's minds at rest who are in tower blocks up and down the country who will be thinking, this could be me?
There has been money made available, and that money shouldn't be an obligation to this remediation work. We know we've identified 4,630 buildings who have the cladding on. Over 50% of them have already started the remediation work. This was one of those buildings that had started that, but this is too slow for me. We need to hurry it up, and therefore we've already used enforcement powers to make sure that those building owners take their responsibilities. There is legal responsibilities, and now it's about enforcement to make sure that they continue that. But I want to see it go quicker and faster. And you know, we talked about Grenfell and what happened and the inquiry that's coming up on the 4th. This must have been incredibly triggering for those people who were, victims of what happened at Grenfell, and the heroic efforts that those families and the people who were at Grenfell at the time, they've spent 7 years fighting to make sure that these changes were put in place, and now it's my job to ensure that that happens as quickly as possible. We can't continue for another 7 years. We've got to do this very quickly, because these are people's homes and people deserve to feel safe in their own home.
Why, having taken on this brief, do you believe that housing is such a problem in this country to provide safe, decent, affordable housing? Why is it so difficult for this country to sort out?
I think that housing has become an asset as opposed to people's home. And I think we've got to return back to, these are homes, they're not assets. We've got to make sure that people have, that's why we put forward in the King's Speech proposals around renters reform, leasehold. We've talked about the national planning policy framework, we've talked about regulation, but actually we've got to make sure that people are aware that housing, we need the supply side problem resolving. We've had a shortage of housing and we haven't built enough, but we also need to make sure that these homes are built with people in mind and remembering that these are places where people live and where they raise their families. They're not assets that people can sweat and make money off. These are actually places where people need to live, and the number one issue for me is that people need to feel safe.
Finally, the residents of this block will be spending tonight in unfamiliar hotel surroundings, maybe being put up by friends and family. What can you say to them as to the government's commitment to fight for justice on their behalf and to get them the support that they need? We've already seen that is happening, and it's really encouraging to see it. But what can you say to them tonight as they face the second night when they're trying to digest what on earth happened in the early hours of Monday morning here?
I mean, it must be, I can't imagine how devastating it is to, first of all, fear for your life, to get out of the building and then to realise you've lost everything. And the worry that people will have and the questions they'll have about their documents, where they're going to live, how their children are going to go to school, how they're going to get to work. We'll do everything we can working with the local authority to support them, making sure that they can continue their lives in what is going to be very difficult for the next few months as we see and assess what work can be done to get them back into their homes and to make them feel the support of the community. We've seen the way the community responds and comes together to support people, but the government will do that as well, working with the local authority to give them all the help that we can give them at this moment in their moment of need, because I can't imagine how that must feel being a mum myself and coming out of the building and then losing everything. It's devastating for them, and we'll be there as much as we possibly can to support them over the next coming months.